Chemistry research with oxygen or water-sensitive compounds is typically performed in a glove box, a sealed environment filled with an inert gas. One challenge of working in a glove box is that everything new brought into the sealed environment risks introducing water vapor or oxygen into the system, which could compromise the integrity of the glove box. Because solvents are typically brought into the glove box in large quantities, freeze pump thaw is not an ideal option. Another method using specialized equipment is becoming more popular, that being a pressurized or vacuum solvent dispenser, which we will be learning about today. Before we begin, it is important to drive off all water from the glassware using heat. This will be done prior to using the solvent dispenser. The glassware can be heated in an oven for several hours and then allowed to cool. After this, the Schlenk flask will be hooked up to the Schlenk line and put under vacuum. The Schlenk flask will then be heated directly with a heat gun until hot to the touch, and it will be allowed to cool. This step will be repeated 3 times while maintaining vacuum. Once this is completed, the Schlenk flask will be sealed and removed from the Schlenk line, being sure to clean off any grease from the neck of the flask prior to beginning with the solvent line. We will begin by labeling the flask. Solvents have the same color, so this is an incredibly necessary step. The vacuum line in this setup is kept closed, so the next step is to turn the vacuum pump on, waiting for it to reach the lowest pressure achievable by the pump. The valve on the left leading to the pressurized argon gas should be opened as well to ensure the inert gas flow will be ready when needed. And we will also open the solvent columns, turning the appropriate valves at the top of the column and back behind the column. Now that the vacuum pump has reached a lower pressure and stabilized, the side valve on the right is opened and the gas line is allowed to be brought under vacuum. The gas line valve under your desired solvent switch is turned, allowing vacuum to be drawn through the rest of the connecting line where your Schlenk flask will be attached. Before attaching the Schlenk flask to the solvent dispenser, new hydrocarbon grease should be applied to the neck of the Schlenk flask in order to ensure a proper seal. The adapter will also need to be attached. The adapter should be twisted right and left once attached to spread the grease around the neck, forming a proper seal. To remove the protective cap, the clamp must be removed and the line must be switched from vacuum to argon. The flask will then be added under positive pressure of argon. Once securely in place, the vacuum argon switch is turned back to vacuum and the clamp is placed back on. The lab jack and cork stand will be placed under the Schlenk flask in order to give better support. Once the vacuum pump has stabilized, we will be able to backfill with argon by switching the vacuum argon switch to argon very quickly before returning to vacuum. The pump will be allowed to stabilize again. This step will be repeated 3 times. Once the pump has stabilized for the final time, the gas line leading to the flask will be closed, and the vacuum argon switch will be turned back to argon. Now the Schlenk flask's stopper can be opened, and we can begin filling with our solvent by turning the colored knob slightly. This step should be done slowly, ensuring that the solvent does not get backed up within the neck of the Schlenk flask. Once the flask has been filled past the halfway point, the solvent line is closed. The neck of the flask remains open. The argon gas line is opened very quickly to allow argon to flush out the neck of the flask. The flask is sealed with its stopper, and the argon line is open again, allowing the flask to be removed from the solvent dispenser. The protective cap is placed back on, and the argon vacuum switch is turned back to vacuum, holding the cap in place. The clamp will then be added again. The adapter will then be removed from the Schlenk flask, and the Schlenk flask should be cleaned of any hydrocarbon grease that remains on the neck. The gas line should then be closed, as well as the column valves at the top and rear of the solvent dispenser. Finally, the vacuum line valve on the right side can be closed, and the vacuum pump itself can be turned off. As always, be sure to record the date, your initials, the type of solvent, and the amount of solvent removed from the system for the maintenance of a permanent record. Thank you for watching this explainer video on how to use a pressurized vacuum solvent dispenser. Thank you to Dr. Stieber for demonstrating the technique for today's video.